The emergency council chamber aboard the HFY flagship Serenity's Edge had never felt smaller. Admiral Zexai pressed her four-fingered hands against the holographic display, watching the red blips advance across the star map like a spreading plague. Each dot represented 1,000 Vorthak warships, each warship carried enough firepower to crack a moon, and there were over 3 million of them closing in on the last free worlds of the galaxy. The hegemony forces will reach our final defensive line in 47 standard rotations, reported Commander Veltar, his usually calm voice cracking with barely contained despair. Our combined fleets number barely 200,000 vessels. The mathematics are unfavorable. Zexai's secondary arms twitched, a nervous habit she developed during the 6-year war that had consumed their civilization. The Vorthak hegemony had swept across the galaxy like a cosmic wildfire, enslaving entire species and strip-mining worlds for resources. Her own people, the HFY, had been among the first to fall. Now she commanded a desperate alliance of the last free races, the crystalline Shaleth, the gas-breathing Nulvok, the hive-minded Rikstar, and dozens of smaller species. All united in their shared terror of the hegemony's endless hunger. "What about the Terran Union?" asked Ambassador Krixtal, her crystal body chiming softly with anxious harmonics. "Surely they must have received our communications by now?" A bitter laugh escaped Zexai's throat. "The humans? They're a single-world species that only achieved faster-than-light travel 60 rotations ago. Their entire fleet consists of maybe 50 primitive vessels. What could they possibly do against the hegemony?" "They are Deathworlders," Veltar pointed out quietly. "Their planet is classified as a Class 12 hazard world. The atmospheric composition alone would kill most of us in minutes." "So what? The Korvesh are Deathworlders too, and they fell to the hegemony in less than a cycle. Brutality doesn't win wars, numbers do. Technology does. And we have neither." The holographic display flickered, showing the latest intelligence reports. The hegemony had just finished consuming the Altair system, adding its industrial capacity to their already overwhelming war machine. Soon they would control 90% of the galaxy's resources. The mathematics were indeed unfavorable. "Admiral," came a new voice from the chamber's communication array. "We're receiving a response from the Terran Union." Zexai's heart sank. She'd sent the distress call to humanity more out of desperate protocol than any real hope. Every civilized species in the galaxy had received the same message: the hegemony was coming, and they needed every ship, every weapon, every warm body they could get for one final stand. "Put it through," she sighed. The hologram shifted, and suddenly they were looking at something that made several council members recoil in instinctive fear. The human was tall by galactic standards, with pale skin marked by what looked like ritual scars and burning blue eyes that seemed to peer directly into their souls. His hair was the color of metal, and when he spoke, his voice carried the casual confidence of a predator. "This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We've received your distress call, and we're on our way." Zexai blinked all four eyes in confusion. "Admiral Chen, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, you should know that the hegemony fields over 3 million warships. Your entire fleet will be sufficient," Chen interrupted, his scarred face showing no emotion. "We've been monitoring hegemony communications for the past 6 months. We know exactly what we're dealing with." You've been monitoring them? How?" A thin smile crossed the human's features. "We have our methods. Expect the first wave of Terran forces to arrive at your position in 14 standard hours. We'll coordinate our defensive strategy then." "First wave?" Veltar leaned forward. "How many ships are you sending?" "Enough." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. "Arrogant mammals," muttered Ambassador Krixtal. "They'll be slaughtered." But Zexai was studying the star charts with new interest. Humanity's homeworld, Terra, was located in a sparse region of space that should have made it easy prey for the hegemony's advanced scouts. Yet somehow, the humans had remained undetected and unmolested for the entire duration of the war. Either they were incredibly lucky, or incredibly dangerous. She was about to find out which. 14 hours later, the first human ships began emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the HFY defensive perimeter. SciFi watched from the bridge of Serenity's edge, expecting to see a handful of primitive vessels that would be obliterated the moment they encountered real combat. Instead, she saw something that defied everything she thought she knew about warfare. The human ships were wrong. Not technologically, though their angular, aggressive designs looked nothing like the sleek curves favored by most civilized races, but fundamentally wrong in a way that made her skin crawl. They moved through space like living things, their formations shifting and adapting with an organic fluidity that suggested intelligence far beyond simple tactical computers. "Sensors are having trouble getting clear readings," reported her tactical officer. "Their hulls seem to be absorbing our scanning beams." "How many ships?" SciFi demanded. I'm not sure. The sensor ghost signatures are overlapping. At least 50, maybe as many as 200. The lead human vessel, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed anything in the Allied fleet, opened a communication channel. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen, and SciFi noticed something she'd missed before. The human's eyes held the flat, emotionless stare of a natural-born killer. "Admiral SciFi, this is Admiral Chen. We're ready to begin operations." "Operations?" SciFi struggled to keep her voice steady. "Admiral, I appreciate your willingness to help, but you have to understand the tactical situation. The hegemony has overwhelming numerical superiority. Our best strategy is to establish a defensive perimeter and—" "No," Chen interrupted. "Defensive warfare is how you lose to a superior force. We're going to attack." The words hit the bridge like a physical blow. Several of SciFi's officers made sounds of distress, while others simply stared at the screen in disbelief. "Attack?" Veltar's voice was barely a whisper. "Admiral Chen, there are 3 million hegemony vessels advancing on our position. Even if we combined all our forces, we'd be outnumbered 15 to 1. "Sounds about right," Chen nodded. "We've faced worse odds." "You faced worse odds than 15 to 1? When?" The human smile was cold and sharp as a blade. "Every Tuesday." Before anyone could process that statement, the human fleet was moving. Not toward the defensive perimeter where the Allied forces waited, but directly toward the advancing hegemony armada. Within minutes, they had disappeared into hyperspace, leaving the Allied Council in stunned silence. "They're insane," whispered Ambassador Krixtal. "They're going to get themselves killed." But SciFi was studying the tactical display with growing fascination. The human fleet had moved with perfect coordination, their departure time to the nanosecond. Whatever else they weren't amateurs. "Open a channel to all Allied vessels," she ordered. "We're moving to support the Terran forces." "Admiral," Veltar protested, "we don't even know where they went." "Then we'd better find them fast." The first indication that something had gone wrong for the hegemony came 3 hours later, when their advanced scouts simply stopped reporting. The massive Vorthak war fleet had been maintaining strict communication protocols, with each vessel checking in every 30 minutes. Suddenly, an entire sector of their formation had gone dark. Fleet Commander Gorthake studied the tactical display from his flagship's command center, his 6 arms manipulating multiple control interfaces simultaneously. The Vorthak were a warrior race, evolved from pack hunters on a world where only the strongest survived. They had conquered half the galaxy through sheer brutality and overwhelming numbers. The idea that some primitive species could threaten them was almost laughable. "Almost. Status report on Scout Group 7, he commanded. "No response to hails, Fleet Commander," reported his communications officer. "Their last transmission was 18 minutes ago, reporting normal patrol status. Send a reconnaissance force. I want to know what happened to them." The reconnaissance force consisted of 50 heavy cruisers, each one capable of reducing a planet to rubble. They jumped to hyperspace and emerged in the sector where Scout Group 7 had last been seen. What they found there would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. The scout ships were still there, but they were no longer ships. They had been turned into something else, twisted sculptures of metal and flesh that hung motionless in space like grotesque art installations. Some had been turned inside out, their crews still alive and screaming inside their transformed vessels. Others had been crushed into perfect spheres, their emergency beacons still transmitting the dying words of their crews. What could have done this?" whispered the reconnaissance leader. His question was answered when the darkness around them began to move. The human ships materialized out of what should have been empty space, their stealth systems disengaging to reveal the true scope of the nightmare facing the hegemony. There weren't 50 human vessels, or even 200. There were thousands of them, ranging from sleek frigates to massive dreadnoughts that defied every principle of engineering physics. But it wasn't the numbers that froze the Vorthak crews with terror, it was the ships themselves. They were alive. Not in the sense of having biological components, but truly, genuinely alive. Their hulls rippled with muscle-like contractions, their weapon ports opened and closed like breathing mouths, and their sensors moved with the fluid grace of predatory eyes. "All units," the reconnaissance leader's voice cracked over the calm, "we are under attack by..." The transmission cut off as the human fleet opened fire. What followed couldn't properly be called a battle. The Vorthak ships, designed for overwhelming firepower and brutal efficiency, found themselves facing weapons that seemed to actively hunt them. Human missiles didn't just explode, they burrowed into their targets like living parasites, eating through armor and hull plating before detonating inside the ship's most vital systems. Energy beams didn't just burn through shields, they seemed to learn from each impact, adapting their frequencies to maximize damage. Within minutes, the entire reconnaissance force had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris and frozen atmosphere. Not a single human vessel showed even minor damage. Back on the Hegemony flagship, Fleet Commander Gorthake stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The reconnaissance force's destruction had been broadcast live to his command center, and what he had seen challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. "How many ships did they lose?" he demanded. "None, Fleet Commander. Sensors show no human casualties." "That's impossible. They were outnumbered 50-1. The recordings are clear, sir." The human vessels appear to be using some form of adaptive technology. Their weapons systems learned and countered our defensive measures in real time. Gorthake's mind raced through the implications. If the humans could field technology that advanced, why hadn't they intervened earlier in the war? Why had they let the hegemony consume 90% of the galaxy before revealing themselves? The answer came to him like a bolt of lightning, and it made his blood turn to ice. They had been waiting. The humans hadn't hidden from the hegemony, they had been studying them. Learning their tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. The entire 6-year war had been nothing more than a testing ground, allowing Earth's Deathworlders to gather intelligence while the galaxy burned around them. "Sir," his communications officer's voice was shaking, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through." The face that appeared on the main screen was different from the one they had seen before. This human was younger, with dark skin and eyes that held the cold intelligence of a master strategist. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to raise it. "Fleet Commander Gorthake, this is Admiral Sarah Washington of the Terran Defense Force. I'm here to discuss terms for your surrender." The entire command center fell silent. Gorthake's 6 arms trembled with rage as he processed the sheer audacity of the statement. "Surrender?" he roared. "You face the might of 3 million hegemony vessels, and you dare speak of surrender?" "I face the might of 3 million primitives who have grown fat and lazy from 6 years of easy conquest," Washington replied calmly. "Your ships are obsolete, your tactics are predictable, and your crews are soft. You've been fighting farmers and philosophers for so long that you've forgotten what real warfare looks like. We are the Vorthak. We are the masters of war itself." "No," Washington's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any scream. "You're prey. And we're about to show you why Earth is classified as a death world." The transmission ended, leaving the Hegemony Command Center in stunned silence. But before anyone could process what had just happened, the tactical display erupted into chaos. The human fleet was moving again, but this time they weren't attacking in formation. They were spreading out across the entire front, each ship operating independently with a level of coordination that defied explanation. Within minutes, they had penetrated deep into hegemony space, striking at supply lines, command vessels, and strategic installations with surgical precision. "They're everywhere," gasped the tactical officer. "How are they moving so fast?" The answer became clear as the hours passed. The human ships weren't just using conventional hyperspace technology, they were using something far more advanced. They could appear anywhere in the galaxy within minutes, strike their targets with devastating effectiveness, and disappear before the hegemony could respond. But the real horror wasn't their speed or their firepower. It was their methods. The humans didn't just destroy ships, they turned them into warnings. Hegemony vessels found themselves transformed into grotesque monuments to human creativity, their crews kept alive to broadcast their terror to the rest of the fleet. Some ships were filled with Earth's most aggressive bacteria, turning their crews into living incubators for diseases that defied all known medical science. Others were subjected to gravitational fields that slowly crushed them over the course of hours, their death agonies transmitted on all frequencies as psychological warfare. "They're not trying to win quickly," Veltar observed as he watched the carnage unfold from the bridge of Serenity's edge. "They're trying to break the hegemony's will to fight." Zexai nodded grimly. The human tactics were unlike anything she had ever seen. They combined the brutal efficiency of apex predators with the cold calculation of master strategists. Every action was designed to maximize not just physical damage, but psychological impact. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Chen." "Put it through." The human appeared on the main screen, and Zexai was startled to see that he was smiling. Not the cold, predatory smile from before, but something that looked almost friendly. "Admiral Zexai, I thought you'd like to know that the first phase of our operation is complete. We've eliminated roughly 30% of the hegemony fleet and captured their primary command vessel." 30%? Zexai's voice cracked. "In 6 hours?" 7 hours, actually. "But who's counting?" Chen's smile widened. "We're moving to phase 2 now. You might want to keep your people clear of the combat zone." Phase 2? The fun part. The transmission ended, leaving Zexai staring at the tactical display in disbelief. The human fleet had just accomplished what the combined forces of dozens of species had failed to do in 6 years of warfare. They had broken the hegemony's advance and turned the tide of the war in a single day. But she had a feeling that the real demonstration of human capability was yet to come. The hegemony's remaining forces had retreated to the Vortex Nebula, a massive stellar nursery that served as their primary shipyard and industrial complex. It was here, among the swirling gases and newborn stars, that they had built the war machine that had conquered most of the galaxy. The nebula's natural interference made it difficult for enemy forces to navigate, while its vast size provided room for millions of vessels to maneuver. Fleet Commander Gorthay K had consolidated his remaining 2 million ships into a defensive formation that had never failed in 6 years of warfare. Multiple layers of overlapping shields, interlocking fields of fire, and enough firepower to sterilize entire solar systems. If the humans wanted to finish what they had started, they would have to come to him. He didn't have to wait long. The first sign of the human approach came when the nebula's background radiation began to shift. The swirling gases that had protected the hegemony for generations suddenly seemed to be moving in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Stars that had been constant for millions of years began to flicker and dance, their light bending in ways that violated every principle of physics. "Sir," the sensor operator's voice was tight with fear, "we're detecting massive gravitational distortions throughout the nebula. It's like space itself is being twisted." Gorthay K studied the readings with growing unease. The humans had demonstrated technological superiority in their previous encounters, but this was something else entirely. They weren't just manipulating matter and energy, they were manipulating the fundamental structure of reality itself. "Where are they?" he demanded. I don't know, sir. The distortions are interfering with our sensors. They could be anywhere." The answer came in the form of a transmission that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Admiral Washington's face appeared on every screen in the hegemony fleet simultaneously, her dark eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 dying stars. Fleet Commander Gorthay K, her voice echoed through the nebula like the whisper of a god, "You've made a tactical error. You've trapped yourself in a confined space with nowhere to run." "This is our stronghold," Gorthake snarled. "We've defended it against every enemy for 6 years. Your tricks won't work here." "You're right," Washington nodded. "Our tricks won't work here. That's why we're not going to use tricks." The transmission ended, and for a moment, the nebula was silent. Then the stars began to die. Not metaphorically, literally. The newborn stars that had been forming in the nebula's stellar nurseries began to collapse, their fusion reactions snuffed out by forces that should not have existed. The death of each star released waves of exotic radiation that swept through the hegemony fleet like a cleansing fire. "What are they doing?" gasped the tactical officer. "They're killing the stars," Gorthake whispered. "They're actually killing the stars." The implications hit him like a physical blow. The humans weren't just technologically advanced, they were operating on a level that transcended normal warfare. They were manipulating stellar physics, playing with the fundamental forces that held the universe together. But the star killing was just the beginning. As the nebula's natural light dimmed, new illumination began to appear. Vast geometric patterns of pure energy stretched across light years of space, forming a web of interconnected lines that pulsed with malevolent purpose. The hegemony fleet found itself trapped within this cosmic spiderweb, their ships suddenly unable to move or communicate with each other. "It's some kind of field," the engineering officer reported. "It's interfering with our engines, our weapons, everything. We're completely helpless." That's when the human ships began to appear. They materialized out of the energy web itself, as if they had been woven from the same forces that were now holding the hegemony fleet captive. But these weren't the ships that had fought the earlier battles. These were something new, something that made the previous vessels look like toys by comparison. The human warships were no longer merely alive, they were transcendent. Their hulls writhed with patterns of light that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the eye could process. Their weapons ports opened like the mouths of cosmic horrors, revealing depths that extended into spaces that couldn't possibly exist within the ship's physical dimensions. "My God," whispered the communications officer. "What are they?" Gorthake didn't answer. He couldn't answer. The sight of the human fleet had triggered something deep in his species' genetic memory, the primordial terror that had kept their ancestors alive on a world full of apex predators. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to run, to hide, to surrender completely to the superior force that had come to claim them. But he was still the fleet commander of the hegemony. He had conquered 100 worlds and enslaved a dozen species. He would not go quietly into the dark. "All ships," he commanded, his voice steadier than he felt, "concentrate fire on the largest human vessel. Show them that the Vorthak do not yield." The hegemony fleet opened fire with everything they had. 2 million ships unleashed their fury in a concentrated barrage that should have been enough to crack a planet's crust. The energy output was so massive that it temporarily outshone the dying stars around them. The human flagship absorbed the entire barrage without even slowing down. Not deflected it, not shielded against it, absorbed it. The massive vessel's hull seemed to drink in the energy like a sponge, its surface rippling with waves of converted power. When the barrage ended, the ship was noticeably larger than before, as if it had somehow used the attack to fuel its own growth. "Impossible," breathed the tactical officer. "Nothing can absorb that much energy." "We're not fighting ships," Gorthake realized with growing horror. "We're fighting something else. Something that treats our most powerful weapons as food." The human flagship opened a communication channel, and Admiral Washington's face appeared on the screen once more. But something had changed about her. Her eyes now held depths that seemed to extend into infinity, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions beyond normal hearing. "Fleet Commander," she said, her words seeming to come from everywhere at once, "I want you to understand what you're facing. Your species has spent 6 years conquering primitive civilizations that barely understood the basics of faster-than-light travel. You've grown comfortable with easy victories and overwhelming numerical superiority." The energy web around the hegemony fleet began to pulse faster, and several ships reported that their hulls were beginning to change color. "But you made a mistake," Washington continued. You assumed that because we hadn't interfered before, we were weak. You thought that because we were a single world, we were helpless. You believed that because we seemed primitive, we were harmless. One of the trapped hegemony vessels suddenly imploded, its mass compressing into a point of infinite density before exploding outward in a shower of exotic particles. You were wrong about all of it. Another ship imploded. Then another. The energy web was systematically crushing the hegemony fleet, turning their own vessels into weapons against them. Earth isn't just a death world because of our hostile environment, Washington explained, her voice now carrying the weight of cosmic authority. It's a death world because of what we've become. We've had to survive on a planet that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. We've faced extinction events that would have wiped out your entire species. We've evolved not just to survive, but to thrive in conditions that would drive most intelligent life forms insane. The implosions were coming faster now, entire battle groups disappearing into quantum foam as the human weapons systematically disassembled the hegemony fleet. And when we finally reached the stars, Washington continued, we discovered that the universe was full of threats that made our homeworld look like a paradise. Cosmic horrors that exist in the spaces between dimensions. Machine intelligences that consume entire galaxies. Entities that predate the formation of matter itself. Gorthek's hands were shaking as he watched his fleet die around him. What are you saying? I'm saying that we've been fighting things that make your little empire look like a children's game. We've been preparing for wars that would shatter reality itself. And when we received your distress call, we realized that we finally had a chance to field test our new weapons. The last of the hegemony fleet disappeared into the quantum foam, leaving only the flagship floating alone in the energy web. Gorthek found himself face to face with the true scope of human power, and the realization broke something deep inside his mind. You've been testing weapons on us? Of course. Washington's smile was as cold as the void between stars. Did you think we developed all this technology just to defend one primitive world? We've been preparing for threats that exist on a galactic scale. Your little conquest spree was just a convenient way to test our capabilities in a combat environment. The energy web began to contract, and Gorthek felt his ship's hull groaning under the pressure. The funny thing is, Washington continued, we're still using training weapons. Our actual warfleet is designed to fight entities that exist in 11 dimensions simultaneously. What you're seeing here is basically our equivalent of a police force. The flagship's hull began to crack, and Gorthek realized that he was about to join the rest of his fleet in oblivion. But before the energy web could finish its work, it suddenly stopped contracting. However, Washington said, we're not monsters. We're willing to offer you a choice. What kind of choice? Surrender unconditionally, and we'll allow your species to continue existing under human supervision. You'll be relocated to a world where you can't threaten anyone, and you'll be given the opportunity to learn how to be productive members of galactic society. And if we refuse? Washington's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed to have too many dimensions. Then we'll demonstrate what our actual warfleet can do. Trust me, Fleet Commander, you don't want to see what happens when we stop playing games. Gorthek stared at the tactical display, where his mighty fleet had been reduced to a single ship floating in an ocean of exotic energy. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was an offer of mercy from a species that had evolved beyond the need for mercy. I surrender, he whispered. Excellent. You've made the right choice. The energy web began to dissipate, and the human ships started to fade back into whatever dimension they had emerged from. Within minutes, the nebula was empty except for the single hegemony flagship and the slowly expanding clouds of debris that had once been the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Gorthek slumped in his command chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. His species had been defeated not by superior numbers or advanced technology, but by beings who operated on a level of existence that he could barely comprehend. Sir, his communications officer said quietly, we're receiving a transmission from the Allied fleet. Put it through. Admiral Zexhi's face appeared on the screen, her expression a mixture of relief and bewilderment. Fleet Commander Gorthek, we've been monitoring the situation. Are Are you surrendering? We have no choice, Gorthake replied. The humans, they're not like us. They're not like anyone. They're something else entirely. What do you mean? Before Gorthake could answer, another transmission overrode the channel. Admiral Chen appeared on the screen, his scarred face showing the same casual confidence as before. Admiral Zexhai, he said, the hegemony has agreed to surrender. We'll be escorting their remaining forces to a secure location where they can be processed and relocated. Processed? Don't worry, Chen's smile was almost reassuring. We're not going to hurt them. We're going to help them learn how to be better neighbors. It's part of our standard post-conflict rehabilitation program. Zexhai blinked all four eyes. You have a standard post-conflict rehabilitation program? Of course. We've been doing this for a while now. The hegemony isn't the first aggressive species we've encountered, and they won't be the last. But with proper guidance and supervision, even the most warlike races can learn to contribute positively to galactic society. How long have you been doing this? Chen's smile took on a slightly mysterious quality. Let's just say that Earth's official first contact with alien life wasn't quite as recent as we've let everyone believe. The transmission ended, leaving Zexhai staring at the screen in shock. The implications of Chen's words were staggering. If the humans had been secretly monitoring and managing galactic affairs for longer than anyone realized, then the entire balance of power in the galaxy was different than she had imagined. But before she could process this revelation fully, her tactical officer called out urgently. Admiral, we're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the galaxy. It looks like human ships are appearing in every major system simultaneously. Zexhai turned to the tactical display and felt her blood turn to ice. The human fleet wasn't just operating in the Vortex Nebula, they were everywhere. Thousands of their ships were materializing around every inhabited world, every space station, every major trade route in the galaxy. Are they invading? I don't think so, Veltar said quietly. Look at their positions. They're not taking aggressive stances. They're protecting. He was right. The human ships were positioning themselves to defend the galaxy's most vulnerable points. They were establishing a protective perimeter around every world that had been threatened by the hegemony, every refugee fleet that had fled the conquest, every civilian population that had been hiding in the outer systems. They're not just defeating the hegemony, Zexhai realized. They're taking over galactic security entirely. A new transmission came through, this time from a human she hadn't seen before. The woman was elderly, with silver hair and eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. Citizens of the galaxy, she said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty, this is Secretary General Maria Santos of the United Nations of Earth. As of this moment, the Terran Defense Force is assuming responsibility for galactic security and peacekeeping operations. The implications hit Zexhai like a tidal wave. The humans weren't just helping to defeat the hegemony, they were establishing themselves as the galaxy's new protectors. And given what she had just witnessed, no one was in a position to object. We understand that this may come as a shock, Santos continued, but recent events have made it clear that the galaxy requires active supervision to prevent future conflicts of this magnitude. The Terran Defense Force has the capability and the responsibility to ensure that no species ever again suffers the fate that befell the hegemony's victims. Active supervision, Zexhai whispered. They're not just defeating the hegemony. They're taking control of everything. We want to make it clear, Santos said, that Earth has no interest in conquest or domination. We simply want to ensure that the galaxy remains peaceful and stable for all its inhabitants. To that end, we will be establishing monitoring stations throughout known space and maintaining a rapid response fleet to deal with any future threats. The transmission ended, and the bridge of Serenity's edge fell silent. Zexhai stared at the tactical display, watching as human ships took up positions around every major world in the galaxy. They had gone from being an unknown single-world species to the galaxy's dominant power in less than 24 hours. What have we done? She whispered. We've been saved, Veltar replied quietly. The question is, what comes next? 3 months after the hegemony's surrender, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy peace under humanity's watchful eye. The Terran Defense Force had established monitoring stations in every major system, their ships patrolling trade routes and maintaining order with an efficiency that was both impressive and terrifying. Admiral Zexai stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Galactic Council station, watching human ships move through the system with predatory grace. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, built in just 6 weeks using technology that seemed to bend the laws of physics. It served as both a diplomatic center and a demonstration of human capabilities, a reminder to every species in the galaxy that their new protectors were not to be underestimated. Admiral Veltar approached from behind, his voice carrying the weariness that had become common among the council members. The human delegation is ready for the security briefing. Zexai nodded and made her way to the main conference chamber. The briefings had become a regular occurrence, with human officials providing updates on galactic security status and upcoming policy changes. On the surface, they were presented as collaborative discussions between equals. In reality, they were informational sessions where the humans told everyone else what was going to happen. The conference chamber was already full when she arrived. Representatives from dozens of species sat around a circular table, their expressions ranging from grateful to concerned to openly fearful. At the head of the table sat Admiral Chen, his scarred face showing the same calm confidence that had become his trademark. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chen began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, "thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to report that galactic security remains stable, with no major incidents in the past month." Ambassador Crixtal, her crystal body chiming softly, leaned forward. "Admiral Chen, we've received reports of human ships conducting investigations in several neutral systems. Are these related to ongoing security concerns?" Chen's smile was diplomatic but revealed nothing. The Terran Defense Force conducts routine security assessments throughout the galaxy. These are preventative measures designed to identify potential threats before they become actual problems.